The rancher had carried a wounded tribal girl on his horse. By morning, he came to with his back against an oak and his wrists lashed tight. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Rough hemp bit into Jesse Boone's skin until blood welled. Sunlight filtered through high branches, laying restless shadows across his face, while his stallion grazed calmly 30 yards away, unaware of its master's trouble. Each heartbeat sent a hammering ache through his skull. Fragments of yesterday returned like half-faded echoes. Just a day earlier, everything had been ordinary. Jesse Boone had been riding the east fence line of his spread, watching for breaks, where cattle might stray into Apache land. 30 years old, he read the Montana grasslands like scripture, every ridge and draw etched into his memory. Autumn air carried the edge of early winter golden aspen, shimmering against distant peaks already capped in snow. His bay stallion Ranger stepped careful along a rocky trail, winding through scattered pines. Jesse had been thinking about the coming cattle drive to Billings when he spotted smoke rising from a hidden valley. Thin wisps curled skyward, too neat to be wildfire, too lonely for a homestead. Curiosity overruled caution. He urged Ranger down the slope, following an old game path through tangled brush. At the valley floor, horror spread before him like a nightmare in daylight. 3 wagons blazed in the clearing canvas, eaten by flames clawing skyward. Bodies lay strewn about, some face down in the dirt, others twisted in dreadful shapes. Jesse swung down, hand brushing the colt on his hip. The massacre was fresh. Smoke still poured from wagon frames. The earth was dark with blood not yet dry. He moved carefully among the dead, searching for life. They looked to be travelers, maybe a family bound west like so many chasing fortune in California. Scattered belongings told their story: a child's wooden doll with yarn hair, a Bible fluttering open in the wind, a photograph of a stern-faced man in his Sunday coat. Then a faint moan froze him. Behind the largest wagon, half hidden under a blood-soaked blanket, something stirred. Boots crunching glass. Jesse lifted the cover. She couldn't have seen more than 20 summers. Long black hair braided with beads and feathers marked her Apache heritage. Blood seeped from a deep cut along her shoulder, her buckskin torn and stained. Dark eyes opened as he knelt, eyes filled with pain and defiance that shook him. Most men would have walked away. With raids rising over the past year, tensions burned hot, and few settlers would risk lifting an Apache woman from such a scene. She tried to push herself up the motion, tearing her wound wider until blood gushed into the soil. Instinct moved Jesse's hands before thought. He pulled his canteen and a clean bandana from his saddlebag. She spoke in quick Apache words, sharp and urgent. He didn't know the language, but her meaning was plain enough. She thought he meant to finish what others had begun. Instead, he pressed her gently down and washed the gash with cool water. The wound was deep, but clean, likely cut by a blade, not a bullet. He bound her shoulder with the bandana, steady hands working, while her eyes never left his face, watching with unnerving intensity. When he finished, she struggled again to rise, determined to leave, though her strength failed. Jesse caught her arm as she swayed. She'd lost too much blood, and town was 2 days' ride away through hostile country. Even if she could walk, nightfall would bring predators, animal and human alike. The easy choice was to leave her water and jerky, then ride for help. The safe choice was to brand her guilty and hand her to the law. The expected choice was to treat her as a threat. Instead, Jesse lifted her light frame onto Ranger, She trembled with shock as he settled her in front of his saddle. Her head drooped against his shoulder as consciousness drifted. He held her steady through the long ride home, 3 hours of careful pace, hoping infection wouldn't set in. The sun was dipping behind the western ridges when his ranch came into view, nestled in a bowl of rolling hills, log house, and barns standing firm, cattle grazing peaceful as if the world held no terror. Inside, he laid her on the leather sofa. She drifted in and out while he cleaned and dressed the wound with supplies Mary Boone had once insisted they keep well stocked. The cut had passed clean through flesh, sparing bone and artery. Painful, but survivable. As evening settled, Jessie fixed beans and cornbread, unsure she'd eat, but knowing her strength needed it. She woke as he set a plate nearby, eyes sharp, scanning the room for escape and danger like a wounded hawk not yet ready to trust. Jessie Boone moved with care, pulling up a chair a safe distance away, palms open where she could see them. The last thing he wanted was to spook a girl who'd already been through hell. Tala Skyhawk spoke again in her own tongue voice, steadier but edged with caution. When he shook his head to show he didn't understand, she switched to broken English, heavy with accent. "Why did you help me?" Suspicion weighed every word, but so did a flicker of genuine curiosity. Jessie let the question hang before answering. He could have said it was Christian duty, or that any wounded soul deserved aid. Both answers true, yet not the whole truth. "Seemed like the right thing to do," he finally murmured under the glow of the lamp. "You were bleeding, and I had what you needed." Her dark eyes studied him for a long while, as if she could peel away his words to see what lay underneath. Outside wind rattled the shutters, while cattle lowed across the night pastures. Then she spoke again, sharper now. "My people did not do this," she said, pointing to her wound. "White men painted to look Apache." Her claim struck like a bullet to the chest. Men had been known to stage such raids, planting arrows and relics to incite war and profit from the chaos. "You saw them?" Jessie asked. She nodded. 3. One with yellow hair and a scar across his cheek. "They slaughtered the family, then caught me watching from the trees. I ran, but not far enough." A chill crept through Jessie that had nothing to do with the October night. By sunrise, word would spread, and innocent Apache camps would pay for crimes not theirs. Tala seemed to sense his dread. "My name is Tala Skyhawk. I was gathering herbs when they came. My people camp 2 days north, but I cannot return. They will say I led those men to the family." Every new truth twisted her plight further, wounded alone and trapped between enemies on both sides. Jessie's neighbors already questioned his refusal to join the local militia. Harboring an Apache woman would only set tongues wagging. But sending her out now was no better than a death sentence. As if reading his hesitation, Tala tried to push herself upright. The effort tore her stitches, fresh blood soaking her bandages. Jessie pressed her gently back. "You're not going anywhere? That wound needs rest." Her eyes flickered, surprised, at kindness from a rancher she'd expected nothing from. "You risk much," she whispered. "Your neighbors won't understand." Jessie gave a wry half-smile. "My neighbors don't run this ranch." They both knew the truth was more complicated, but he meant every word. The night dragged quiet. Jessie checked her dressing, kept her drinking water, and watched weariness pull her into deep sleep. He sat alone in the kitchen, mind heavy with what he'd chosen. Coyotes called from the hills, their cries carrying like warnings on the wind. Just before dawn, he finally lay down boots by the door, gun belt hanging within reach. Sleep brought uneasy dreams of burning wagons and painted faces. When sunlight finally cut across his bedroom, birds sang in the oak outside. For a brief moment, he lingered in half-dreams, then it hit him with cold clarity. He was bound to a tree, Tala was gone. The ropes bit his wrists, tied with skill tight enough to hold loose enough not to kill circulation. His boots were missing, though his clothes remained. Most telling of all, his gun was gone. The air smelled of damp pine and earth, while nearby a creek bubbled peacefully, cattle still grazing as though nothing had changed. The sheer normalcy made his predicament more unreal. Footsteps approached, steady, deliberate. Tala emerged from the brush with surprising ease, rifle in one hand, a leather pouch in the other. Her shoulder still bandaged, but her stride strong, her face unreadable. No gratitude, no fear, only sharp intent. "Good morning, Jesse Boone," she said, settling on a fallen log 10 feet away. The fact that she knew his name without being told rattled him. "Morning," he answered cautiously, testing the ropes. They held. "Mind telling me what this is about?" Tala opened the pouch, pulled out jerky, a knife, a bundle of herbs. She chewed slowly, as never leaving his face, as if carving every detail into memory. "You helped me yesterday. That was unexpected." She paused, her lips curving in the faintest smile. "So I tied you to a tree. Strange way of saying thank you, isn't it?" The faint smile softened Tala Skyhawk's face, brushing aside the hardness that had cloaked her since he found her. "I had to be certain of your intentions," she said. "Most men who lend a hand to an Apache woman expect a price." Her words hung between them like smoke from a campfire. Thick, heavy, dangerous. Jesse Boone understood her caution even as the ropes cut into his wrists. "And what did you decide?" he asked. She took her time chewing jerky with deliberate calm, as though weighing his life with every bite. He realized that might not be far from the truth. "You sleep like the dead," she finally said. "Too trusting for a man keeping company with an enemy." "You're not my enemy. Your neighbors would say otherwise." She wasn't wrong. For over a year, tempers between settlers and Apache bands had flared hotter than a dry prairie fire, fanned by provocateurs eager to profit from bloodshed. Trust had become a rare commodity, and mercy was often mistaken for betrayal. Tala rose fluid and sure-footed, the wound on her shoulder seeming less a hindrance than he remembered. She crouched beside him, close enough for Jesse to catch the scent of sage and wild grass in her hair. "The men who slaughtered that family," she whispered, "they'll do it again. Until our people are torn apart by war." Jesse's reply came quicker than his own mind expected. "Then let me help you stop them." The words startled him as much as they startled her, but once spoken they felt right. Justice couldn't be left to chance or wishful thinking. Her eyes narrowed as if searching his soul for lies. At last she reached behind the tree, pulled out his knife, and set the blade to the rope. "Very well, Jesse Boone," she said firmly. "But we do this my way." The bonds fell loose. Jesse flexed blood back into his hands, trying to comprehend the shift in his world. A day ago, he had been a solitary rancher, living quietly on the frontier. Now he was tied to the fate of an Apache woman on a path that could get them both killed. "And what exactly is your way?" he asked while slipping his boots back on and fastening his gun belt. But Tala had already strode to Ranger, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge. She swung into the saddle behind the horn like she belonged there. "We track the painted men," she said flatly, "and make them answer for what they've done." Jesse mounted up the morning sun, spilling across the Montana hills. Behind him lay his ranch, steady and secure, the product of 10 years' sweat. Ahead stretched uncertainty, peril, and the slim promise of justice for strangers whose names he'd never know. Still, a strange optimism stirred in him. Tala Skyhawk might be an enigma, but she wasn't one to sit idle. The hunt was on. For the first hour, silence ruled the trail. Tala guided Ranger with the subtlest shifts of her weight, steering them through wild country, as though the land itself spoke to her. Grassland rolled into broken ridges, timber stands, and canyons deep enough to hide an army. Jesse found his eyes drifting to their back trail, more often the kind of ground that invited ambush. By midday, Tala halted beside a cold mountain creek spilling down from snow-fed peaks. They dismounted, letting Ranger drink. Jesse studied her as she knelt cupping icy water in her hands. Not once did her movements betray weakness, though her wound should have hobbled her. Either she was tougher than most men he knew, or she hid her pain well. "How's your shoulder?" he asked. She glanced back at him, droplets glistening on her lips. "It will heal." "That's not what I asked." Her mouth curved with a trace of mischief. "No, it isn't." She walked to him, peeling away the bandage without warning. The gash was angry red, yet clean. No infection, no fresh bleeding. Healing faster than seemed possible. Maybe her toughness. Maybe his patchwork doctoring had done the job. "You did good work," she said, wrapping it again with practiced hands. "My grandmother taught me healing plants. I gathered some at dawn while you slept." That admission unsettled him. She could have killed him easily while he lay defenseless, yet she hadn't. Reassuring and unnerving all at once. "Tell me about those painted men," Jesse said, steering the talk toward what mattered most. Tala sat on a flat rock nearby, keeping her distance, but not her gaze. Her dark eyes went far away, recalling the horror. "I was gathering wild onions when I heard the first screams. She began, her voice carrying the cadence of an old tale passed down under starlight. Tala Skyhawk's voice carried the cadence of someone raised on stories told around the fire, steady and deliberate. The family had been camped there 2 days, resting their oxen before the climb over Blackfoot Pass. She broke off, scanning the ridgeline with the habit of someone who never trusted the quiet. Only when she was certain the land was still did she go on. 3 men rode in from the east, hard and fast. Their faces were streaked with paint, but wrong. My people paint for protection, for spirit, not for show. These men painted to fool. Jesse Boone felt the weight of her words, though he let her keep the rhythm of her tale. False raids weren't rare. Men with something to gain from chaos had long planted signs to pit neighbor against neighbor. The leader, Tala, said her eyes hard, had yellow hair, and a scar cut from his eye to his jaw. He carried a rifle with silver worked into the stock. Another was shorter, dark-haired, missing a finger on his right hand. The last rode a paint horse with a white blaze on its face, her memory cut sharp as a knife, even though she'd watched from hiding, while death reigned all around her. Jesse knew such detail could mean the difference between chasing shadows and finding killers. They didn't take a thing, she added bitterly. No money, no food, nothing. They scattered Apache arrows among the bodies, drove a war lance into the earth, then set the wagons ablaze and laughed as they rode away. The picture she painted was no random slaughter. It was staged, meant to spark war. Land speculators, arms traders, even politicians would stand to profit once settlers and Apache blood ran in the dust. "Did you recognize any of them?" Jesse asked. She shook her head. "Not Apache, not soldiers, not settlers, I know, but the yellow-haired one wore a badge under his shirt. I saw it flash when he bent over the dead." Jesse stiffened. A badge meant law sheriff's men, marshals, even army officers, sometimes twisted by greed. This wasn't simple murder. It smelled of conspiracy. "We'll need to ride back, see what evidence was left," he said. "Already planning the trail. Already done." Tala reached into her dress and pulled a small leather pouch. From it, she laid out 3 objects: a brass button stamped with an eagle, a torn scrap of cloth from a uniform, and a horseshoe with a strange wear. "I went before dawn while you slept." The button was snagged on a thorn where they mounted. The cloth stuck to their war lance. The horseshoe came from the paint horse I found where they waited. Jesse studied each piece. The button was cavalry issue, the fabric finer than any common soldier's shirt, and the horseshoe bore a smith's mark he didn't know but could trace. He handed them back. "You've been busy. My people don't wait on others to find justice," she said evenly. "We survive by relying on ourselves." The bluntness sobered him. While he had slept, she had risked her life crawling back through ashes and blood. He couldn't help but respect her grit. They mounted up again, following winding trails that seemed to lead nowhere, but were clear to Tala's eye. She read the land like scripture, every bend, every spring, every lookout point. The way grew rougher as the afternoon stretched shale slopes that threatened to send Ranger tumbling thick stands of lodgepole pine that choked the light, narrow canyons that could hide a dozen ambushers. Finally, Jesse asked, "Where are we headed?" Tala's answer was cool and spare. "To someone who knows about painted faces and military brass." Her cryptic tone tested his patience, but he held his tongue. Trust was hard-earned out here, and she had every reason to guard her secrets. They broke free of the timber onto a wide plateau. Peaks gleamed on every horizon, their crowns white with snow rivers curling silver in the valleys far below. Tala slid from her saddle and walked to the edge of a sheer cliff. The canyon beneath dropped so far its floor was swallowed in shadow. Jesse joined her, wary of the exposure. They were visible for miles, no cover to speak of. "Beautiful country?" he said low. Tala's eyes softened. "My grandmother brought me here when I was small. She taught me signs white men don't see." "What kind of signs?" She pointed to a distant ridge. A column of smoke rose so faint he had thought it a single campfire. But there were 3 set, at even distances, rising straight in the still air. 3 fires, she said. "It is a message. Strangers in Apache land, armed, dangerous." Jesse studied the smoke again, realizing she was right. A shiver of unease ran through him. Someone was already watching. What Jesse Boone had first taken for a single plume was in fact 3 columns of smoke spaced evenly along the ridge. No chance it was random. "What's it mean?" he asked. Tala Skyhawk's gaze never left the horizon. Strangers in Apache land. Armed. Dangerous. The message was clear: they were marked, and others now knew they were here. Whether that meant friends or foes was anybody's guess. Jesse's hand brushed his Colt eyes, sweeping the ridgelines for shadows that didn't belong. "Friends of yours?" "Perhaps," Tala answered, though her voice carried more doubt than certainty. They urged Ranger onto a trail that wound sharply into the canyon, so narrow that loose stones clattered away into the abyss with every step. Switchbacks carved by ages of deer and elk carried them lower, where the air grew hotter and stiller. By the time they reached the canyon floor, horse and riders alike were damp with sweat, despite the crisp October air above. A stream ran clear and cold, its banks lined with willows and wild roses. The hush of water was soothing after hours of wind, though Jesse noticed Tala never once let down her guard. She swung down from the saddle. "We walk from here," she said, stripping gear from Ranger's back. "How far?" Jesse asked. "Not far, but horses can't go where we're headed." She led him to a small grove where the stallion could graze the spot chosen with an eye for cover and escape should trouble find them. Then she guided him along the stream on foot, single file. The canyon walls rose like the pillars of some ancient cathedral, sunlight fractured and strange as it filtered down. Nearly an hour later, they rounded a bend where the path seemed to end against a sheer wall of red stone. Tala pressed her hands along the surface until she found a narrow crack. Here, she said, sliding sideways into the rock. Jessie followed, scraping shoulders against jagged stone, until they spilled into a hidden valley. It was a secret world, sealed off by towering cliffs. A waterfall spilled silver into a lake, as still as glass. Wildflowers colored the grass, though frost had claimed the hills beyond. In the center stood a cabin of stone and timber smoke, curling from its chimney, neat rows of vegetables and herbs growing in the sunlight. "Welcome to my grandmother's home," Tala said with quiet pride. An old woman stepped from the doorway, hair white as snow, braids heavy with beads and feathers marking her standing. Her dark eyes, sharp and bright, studied them both. She spoke first in Apache, her words for Tala, but her gaze fixed on Jessie with piercing curiosity. Tala answered, touching her shoulder as she spoke, and after a time the woman approached Jessie directly. "My granddaughter says you saved her life," she said in accented but clear English. "That is not what I'd expect from a white rancher." "I did what anyone ought to do," Jessie replied, unsure of the right manner with her. The old woman laughed, rich and warm. "No, you did what you chose. There's a difference." She waved them toward the cabin. "Come, you will eat. Then we speak of the painted men who shame my people." Inside the single room was orderly and alive. A stove burned low herbs hung from rafters, beds covered in woven blankets, bright with color. At her bidding, they sat at the wooden table while she served venison stew, seasoned with wild plants, cornbread from a Dutch oven, and tea that carried strange but pleasant flavors. They ate in near silence, while the woman studied them with eyes that missed nothing. At length, she spoke. "My name is Old Raven. Among my people, I am called a medicine woman, though your word is too small for what I do." From a leather pouch, she drew the button, the scrap of cloth, the horseshoe Tala had gathered. She placed them carefully on the table. "These tell a story, but not the story you expect." Jessie leaned in, listening. Old Raven turned the brass button in her hand. "Cavalry issue, but old 10 years at least. This cloth is newer fine weave from the East, not worn by common soldiers. And this shoe," she held it up so the light revealed the uneven wear. "This horse carries more weight on the right side. The rider's missing his left leg below the knee," Old Raven said matter-of-factly, her eyes sharp as flint. "Likely lost it in the war. He sits different in the saddle, leans heavy to one side. That's why his horse limps the way it does." Her words shaped flesh and blood from scraps of evidence, building a picture clear as daylight. Jesse Boone found himself admiring her mind, wondering how many other truths she could conjure from the land itself. "The paint horse with the white blaze," she went on, "belongs to a man named Clayton Voss. Runs freight between Fort Benton and the Judith Mountain camps. I've seen him pass here many times. At last, a name, a direction. Their search had shifted from chasing ghosts to hunting a man with flesh bone and an address." Jessie leaned forward. "Where do we find him?" Old Raven's smile was grim. "That depends. If he knows you're on his trail, he'll find you first." Her words settled heavy in the cabin air smoke curling from the hearth, like unspoken secrets. Jessie sensed decades of knowledge in her stare patterns woven from the endless dance of Apache and settler predator and prey. "Clayton Voss isn't the kind to turn tail," she added, settling back into her chair. "He meets trouble head-on with a pistol in his fist and fury in his eyes." The late sun streamed through the small window, laying long shadows across the table, where the evidence lay scattered like puzzle pieces. Jessie studied them again, willing the story to reveal itself. "Tell us about Voss," he said. "Every scrap you've got may save our skins." Old Raven reached for a clay pipe from the mantel, packing it with tobacco and herbs, then lit it with a twig from the fire. She exhaled slow, fragrant smoke, the ritual steadying her thoughts. Clayton Voss came here 15 years back, a Confederate veteran looking for a fresh start. But he carried more money than any discharged soldier should, used it to build his freight line. She rose, tossed another log onto the fire. Outside wind keened through the canyon walls, a mournful counterpoint to her tale. At first he hauled supplies like any other freighter, food, tools, even mail, when storms or raids broke the regular routes. Tala Skyhawk shifted impatiently in her chair, eager for action. But Jesse listened close. Knowing your enemy's history could be as useful as knowing where he bedded down. So what changed? Jesse asked. Old Raven's face darkened. Gold, she said flatly. Struck in the Judiths 3 years back. Not enough for another California rush, but plenty to draw miners, gamblers, and cutthroats. Voss saw his chance. Expanded his line, hauling not just freight, but guns. To anyone with coin. Settlers, miners, even Apache bands desperate for modern firepower. The weight of her words hit Jesse hard. If Voss armed every side, then he profited most when blood flowed. Gun running is a balancing act, Old Raven said, smoke swirling in the lamplight. Too much peace, no demand. Too much war and trade routes die. Voss learned to stoke the fire. Never let it burn out. Never let it blaze out of control. Tala's eyes burned. You believe he staged the massacre? Old Raven nodded slowly. He learned that feeding fear was as profitable as feeding bullets. When peace cooled tempers, he found ways to fan the flames again. The picture was forming ugly and clear. A man with money, reach, and reason enough to sow chaos, and veterans willing to follow his lead. Where do we find him? Jesse asked, leaning forward, ready for more than talk. Old Raven crossed the room to a cedar chest, drew out a map hand-inked with trails, rivers, passes, and settlements. She laid it flat on the table, her finger landing on a mark. Voss keeps his main headquarters here in Maiden, up in the Judiths, but he runs stations 2 waypoints where men and freight change hands. She tapped 3 more points marked in colored ink, each at a chokehold in the land where travelers had no choice but to pass. Closest one's Crow Creek Crossing, she said. 2 shacks and a corral. 4, maybe 5 men keep watch there. Tala bent low over the map, studying every ridge and canyon. The station lay tucked in a valley, hills all around, perfect for watching, perfect for trapping. Jesse frowned. How current is this? Old Raven's eyes glinted. 3 days ago, my grandson Chayton Littlebear traded pelts there. This is no old tale. Clayton Voss was there in the flesh, flanked by 2 men who fit Tala Skyhawk's descriptions perfectly. The timing was too sharp to be coincidence. His sudden appearance at Crow Creek Crossing so soon after the slaughter spoke not of chance, but of planning. More likely, Voss was lying low, letting the first firestorm of outrage burn itself out. It could be a trap, Tala murmured, echoing the very thought gnawing at Jesse Boone's mind. Everything about this could be a trap, he admitted, but the truth won't come to us if we're too scared to ride toward it. As dusk spread across Old Raven's hidden valley, they honed their plan with the kind of care that spelled the line between life and death. The old woman laid out every detail she knew the station's layout. The habits of the hands stationed there, the defensive spots likely chosen if bullets started to fly. Voss is cunning, but no coward, she warned. Corner him and he'll fight. The men with him are veterans, same as he is. Hard men, quick with guns, and seasoned by violence. She vanished into the back of the cabin, returning with tools that turned their small cache of weapons into something more fitting for a campaign. Another rifle boxes of cartridges, a pair of field glasses, and supplies enough for days. Jesse raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you get all this?" "My husband was an army scout," Old Raven said simply. "When death came for him, I kept his gear. The frontier always finds a use for such things." The night was spent oiling rifles, checking revolvers, and going over every step of their approach. Jesse watched with quiet respect as Tala handled the weapons Sure practiced no hesitation. Out here, survival meant mastering whatever tool fate set in your hands. When the fire burned down to embers, Old Raven arranged their sleeping places with the mind of a tactician, angles of defense, lines of escape, nothing left to chance. "Sleep while you can," she said, her voice low. "Tomorrow will test you more than you've ever been tested." Jesse stretched on his bedroll near the single window, ears tuned to the night. The thought of what lay ahead weighed heavy. They were about to step into the lion's den, armed and alone with no badge or law to shield them. Yet letting Voss walk free while innocent Apache villages braced for vengeance they didn't deserve, that was worse. Sometimes justice meant riding beyond the law, staking your life on what your conscience demanded. Morning came cold and gray frost silvering the grass and ice glazing the lake. They ate a quick meal of leftover stew and cornbread while Old Raven sketched their route in charcoal on a strip of bark. Follow the stream until you reach the rock shaped like a sleeping bear. Climb the ridge to your left, then take the game trail north 3 miles. Her instructions were precise, born of long years reading the land. She gave them alternate routes, too, should the first path be blocked. By sunrise, they slipped back through the narrow crack in the canyon wall. The outside world felt harsher after the sheltered calm of her sanctuary, but Jesse rode out with new fire in his chest. Ranger waited in the aspen grove, fresh and ready, ears flicking forward, as though he too sensed what was coming. The morning's ride was rough, the trail climbing toward a pass that offered sweeping views and left them open to watching eyes. By noon, they crouched behind juniper on a ridge, gazing down at Crow Creek Crossing. Just as Old Raven had said, the station was a scatter of weather-beaten buildings beside the creek. Smoke curled from a chimney. Horses grazed inside a corral. Through the glass, Jesse counted 2 main structures, one larger house that doubled as office and bunk room, another smaller, likely storage or stable. A shed sat by the water. He scanned carefully for movement. "How many?" Tala whispered. "At least 3, Jesse muttered, still watching. Then he froze. A man limped from the house, his stride uneven weight carried by a wooden leg. "There's our one-legged friend," Jesse said, handing her the field glasses. She studied the figure, memorizing every detail. When she lowered the glass, her eyes were hard. 2 more just stepped out of the storehouse, she reported. One's the scar-faced blonde, the other's short, dark-haired. Roy Cutter, Jed Crow, and Silas Pike. All 3 killers in one place, just as Old Raven predicted. Too perfect to be accident. Voss had gathered his men here, a fortress, in plain sight, waiting out the storm. They spent the afternoon studying the station, marking routines and defenses. These men weren't raw outlaws. They moved with the discipline of soldiers. Sentinels were posted, rifles within reach, even during chores. Their caution carried the weight of experience. "They're professionals," Jesse said, as the sun dropped low. "Good," Tala replied, with quiet fire. "I prefer enemies worth the fight." Night dropped heavy as they crept closer, slipping from shadow to shadow until the station loomed ahead. Lantern light spilled through the windows, laughter and rough voices carrying on the still air. The men inside felt secure. Too secure. Jesse Boone and Tala Skyhawk crouched behind a stack of freight crates no more than 50 yards from the main house. From there they had a clear view through the glass, yet remained hidden in darkness. What they saw inside made Jesse's jaw tighten. 4 men crowded around a table, cards and whiskey flowing freely. The scar-faced blonde Roy Cutter was holding court, slapping the table, as his story drew roars of laughter. Clayton Voss Tala whispered, pointing. Jesse studied the tall, weathered man through the glass, noting the revolver at his hip, and the rifle leaned within easy reach. Voss looked to be around 40, lean as rawhide, and every inch of him spoke of a man used to commanding others. The rest matched what old Raven had warned them of Silas Pike, the one-legged veteran steadying himself near the corral. Jed Crow, the squat, dark-haired man missing a finger. And a 4th, Hank Doolin, unknown till now, but just as mean-looking as the rest. All carried iron, and all looked too comfortable using it. 4 against 2, Jesse muttered. Numbers don't matter as much as surprise, Tala replied coolly. They think they're safe. We know they're killers. Still, Jesse knew a straight assault would be suicide. Before he could form a plan, Voss suddenly rose and walked toward the window. For a breathless instant, Jesse thought they were spotted. But after a glance into the night, Voss turned back to the table, raising his glass with a laugh. We need them outside, Jesse whispered. Split them up. Fire, Tala said simply. It took Jesse a moment, then he saw her meaning. A blaze would force them out, scatter them. Not the main house too many innocents could have been caught, including their horses. Instead, Tala pointed at the storage shed downwind. They circled behind it, moving with the silence of hunters. The building was old dry, filled with hay and kindling enough to light the sky. Tala struck flint to steel coaxing sparks into tinder until flames licked up the wall. Within minutes, smoke boiled through the gap's fire, racing across the roof. Shouts split the night. Men burst out the door, some half-dressed others already clutching rifles. Damn place is burning down, Voss roared. Get the horses before they bolt, just as Jesse hoped the 4 split. 2 ran to the corral to steady the animals, while Voss and Jed Crow grabbed buckets and sprinted toward the creek. It was time. Jesse stood tall, rifle leveled, his voice sharp as a whip crack. Clayton Voss. You're under arrest for murdering innocent travelers. The words froze the outlaws for the briefest heartbeat, then training took over. Voss dove behind a trough revolver flashing into his hand. Silas Pike dropped to one knee behind the corral fence, his rifle braced steady. Jed Crow and Hank Doolin vanished into the shadows between the buildings, dangerous phantoms in the smoke. Lay down your guns, Jesse shouted, though he knew none of them would. We know what you did to the Carver family. The only answer was Voss's revolver cracking the bullet-splintering wood, inches from Jesse's face. The fight was on. Tala melted into the night, vanishing as only she could. Jesse couldn't see her, but he trusted she was circling, setting the trap from the dark. Gunfire snapped from every direction, the blaze throwing wild shadows that made every figure a ghost. Jesse pushed closer, using smoke for cover, tracking his foes by the flash of muzzles and shouted orders. It had become a deadly game where one mistake meant death. Then a scream tore from the corral, raw, sudden. The sound of struggle, cursing, then silence. "Jed's down!" a voice shouted from the blackness. The Indian got Jed, one of the outlaws, shouted, panic fraying his voice. 3 still stood, but the swagger in their gunfire had given way to unease. Clayton Voss kept firing from behind the trough, yet his shots grew wilder, nerves fraying beneath the weight of fear. Jesse Boone pressed the attack, shifting from cover to cover, his rifle cracking steady as thunder. He wasn't aiming to kill with every pull of the trigger. His goal was to keep their heads down, to smother their chances of mounting a real counterstrike. It worked. Silas Pike. The one-legged veteran suddenly broke from his cover at the corral, hobbling hard for the safety of the main house. Jesse had been waiting for just that mistake. He steadied, led his target, and fired. The shot slammed home. Pike pitched forward, his wooden leg clattering across the dirt like a broken toy. 2 down, Jesse called into the night, knowing Tala Skyhawk was somewhere near unseen, but listening. Voss answered with a hail of lead, his revolver spitting fire. Bullets tore into Jesse's cover splinters, flying past his face close enough to sting. But with every shot, Voss betrayed his position. Jesse rolled left, came up on one knee, and sent 2 rounds straight through the trough. The first sparked off the metal. The second drew a ragged cry, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the ground. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames and the nervous snorts of horses penned in the corral. Jesse kept low eyes, sweeping the shadows. "Tala," he called softly. Here came her answer from near the creek. "One more, he's holed up by the forge." The last outlaw had chosen his ground well. The stone walls gave him solid cover and a clear angle over most of the compound. But patience was something Tala had mastered since childhood, hunting in silence until prey betrayed itself. And betray himself he did, slipping from the forge to gain a clearer shot. That single step sealed his fate. Tala's rifle cracked once the echo rolling off the canyon walls. The man crumpled where he stood. "It's finished," she said, stepping from the dark, her rifle still warm in her hands, but no longer needed. Jesse rose and moved among the fallen, checking each with grim efficiency. Voss was still alive, blood soaking his shoulder, groaning faintly. The others would never rise again. "This one will see trial," Jesse said, binding the outlaw leader's wrists tight. "If we can haul him to a town with a jail," Tala replied, already thinking of the hard miles ahead. They patched his wound just enough to keep him breathing and lashed him across his own horse. His belongings yielded enough evidence, military trappings, stolen goods, to bury him in any honest court. As dawn crept over Crow Creek crossing, smoke drifted skyward from the smoldering shed, a black monument to greed and cruelty snuffed out. Justice had been bought dearly, but at least the Carver family would not be forgotten, and Apache villages would be spared a war designed in lies. The 2 unlikely allies rode south, their prisoner sagging in the saddle behind them. Towering peaks caught the morning light, solemn and eternal, while below them stretched the long road of dust and consequence. Behind lay blood and ruin. Ahead, the fragile hope of peace earned not by lawmen or soldiers, but by a rancher and an Apache woman who refused to stand idle when justice was at stake. The hunt was ended. Their bond was only beginning. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.